As the sun starts warming up our days and the valley starts turning green, a lot of us are starting to think about our yards and our gardens. But here in Western Colorado, it also means we need to be thinking about water, how we use it, how we conserve it, and how we can get it to our yards without breaking the bank or breaking any sprinkler heads. Welcome to House Talk on KAFM 88.1 Community Affairs. I'm Kate Porras, your host. I'm a realtor at RE/MAX 4000, and each month I chat with local pros about all things home and real estate. Right now we want to talk about your yard because it has been so beautiful, so warm this spring, just not a lot of water, and we really could use some of that. Our guest today is Will Rayhorst. He's with WD Yards, irrigation expert. And I know, Will, we were talking, the canals are starting to fill up, at least the main canals are starting, some of those smaller ones, not yet. But it's time to really start thinking about your irrigation system.
Absolutely. And again, thanks for having me on. Sure do appreciate sharing something I'm passionate about. And water is exciting. Irrigation is exciting. So
you have a lot of experience with it, too.
24 years here in the Valley, working for a local landscape company. I'm the operations manager for WD Yards, ISA certified arborist, licensed through the CDA for pesticide application for almost 2.5 decades now, and went through the CSU Master Gardener program back in 2012. So
you've seen a lot. You've got a lot of experience.
Been around, but always something new to learn.
That is true. So when we get our yards, our irrigation systems going, which a lot of people do. In fact, I walked into the studio this morning and they had a few little sprinklers trying to get some water on the shrubs out front here at the radio station. What is one of the biggest mistakes people make each spring?
You know, during the spring, it's hard to make too many mistakes that are consequential. They usually happen in the fall, but you see them in the spring, and it has to do with proper winterization, making sure you put the system, so to speak, to bed the right way, just making sure you don't get that freeze damage in the spring. In the spring, maybe waiting too long if you know there is a problem, and you don't get that rectified before the water comes on. Everyone gets in a panic. Water's there in 2 days. What do I do now? And, of course, all the landscape service providers are all booked up, so it gets real complicated. And it can get real expensive where normally you could get lots of bids. You just got to take the first guy's number and get them to work in order to get it fixed.
So in our area, we have a couple of different ways that people can irrigate. If you are tied into the canal system and you can get the canal water to irrigate, but we have a lot of people that also use just their domestic water to irrigate as well. Talk about the differences between the two.
Oh, they are vast. With the domestic water, the maintenance is just a fraction of what it is with a raw water system. Essentially, you set it up in the spring, and short of making periodic adjustments and the timing and duration of the watering, that's generally all you got to do. Maybe an occasional broken sprinkler. On the raw water side, the maintenance sometimes can be justifiably a nightmare. You constantly have sediment that's entering the system, debris that's entering the system. Everything's erosive. The sediments eat up on the nozzles, they eat up on the sprinklers, they eat up on the valves. And so really it's just a constant maintenance nightmare with that. Cleaning the filters, that's a constant duty. You always have to be done. Even the self-cleaning ones still have to be disassembled periodically throughout the season and actually hand cleaned. So it takes a lot of work, a lot of maintenance to keep a raw water system running.
So speaking from the homeowner standpoint, especially when we're helping people buy and sell homes, a lot of them will look to see if it has the irrigation water from the canals. Can be a lot less expensive to pay for that water compared to using a domestic water system like the city. But like you said, there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, folks don't take into account the maintenance costs. Yeah, the upfront cost of that domestic water looks very expensive, but when you start talking about pump replacements and valve replacements, to give an example, a normal domestic valve, a Rainbird, $30. You get the scrubber valve for the raw water system, it's $130, $175. So the cost difference is vast on that. And again, where a DV valve might last you 20 years without any problems, you get 5 or 6 years out of a raw water valve. And then you're having to look at replacing diaphragms or so forth. And so as a homeowner, definitely want to take into consideration that additional cost running a raw water system. Not every raw water system is bad either, depending on your location in the valley and which canal your water comes from. Sometimes they can be worse in other areas than some spots.
I know a lot of people will, when the canals first start filling and the irrigation company says, okay, your irrigation water is available, a lot of people will wait before they actually turn it on to their own house.
And that's a really advisable, let some of the sediment and stuff actually flow on by. It doesn't take as long as what people think. Sometimes they get the idea, I need to wait a week or 2 weeks, really a couple days for all that to flush out, because there's always sediment in with that water, especially during spring runoff. And I use that quotations this year. But hopefully,
if we have any.
Yeah, exactly. But there's always going to be a sediment load with that, so you're never going to get rid of that. Once August hits, and it's funny, we'll see all this maintenance in May, June, and July. Once August hits, as long as we're not getting hardcore monsoon rains, the rivers really clean up, and therefore the canals clean up, and you see a lot less maintenance just because there isn't that sediment load.
So you're kind of getting that groove. You do the work in the spring, you get in the groove, and hopefully it carries you through to the fall.
You got it. And one thing folks can do, if we get a horrendous thunderstorm up valley, let's say you're in most of the time where you pull from the Colorado, and you know that Glenwood Springs got hammered with a thunderstorm, shut the irrigation system off for a few days and let that nasty, muddy water flow by. Same thing if you're on the Redlands, they draw from the Gunnison there. If Montrose gets a real terrible thunderstorm or something, that might be an opportunity for you to shut that off and let that water flow by.
So we're talking about the fact that we don't have a lot of runoff this year. It's been a very dry winter. Are there ways that people can conserve water without killing their yard? You nailed it. And, I turn a phrase with that. Bluegrass or fescue, the cool season grasses, they don't know it's a drought year. So unfortunately, they're going to take the same amount of water they always take, but being responsible with that water, limiting the overspray, controlling the pressure of your sprinkling system so you're not atomizing those water molecules. Of course, the smaller the droplet, the easier it evaporates, appropriate watering times, all those things help. And there's another thing, don't set it and forget it. The time on your clock in the spring should not be the same time that's on your clock come midsummer. And really those adjustments should be monthly, where you're either turning them up or turning them down, dependent upon the current weather that we're having. Okay, so you mentioned a bunch of things there. Let's go back. You were saying that let's talk about the size of the water droplets, because there are different types of sprinkler heads or systems that you can use. What are some better options for people to choose, knowing that we're not going to have a ton of water? Anytime you can use a low rate nozzle, that's a better thing. That comes with a caveat, though, with the raw water. You can't get the nozzles too small or they plug up with the sediment again. And so it really varies from system to system. And even on one system in someone's yard, it can vary from zone to zone what the best sprinkler or best nozzle is to use. But generally speaking, you want the lowest precipitation rate you can have while still accounting for the quality of the water right there. Okay. And then you also talked about timing. We're coming into spring. Everything is bone dry right now. What is an appropriate amount of time? Let's say for a lawn. Let's do it, because that's usually the most common thing. And generally what you want to see, and timing gets really difficult. A lot of folks will ask us, like, how long do I run the sprinklers? 10 minutes, 15 minutes? And that really depends on that system itself and how it's set up. If you get really good head-to-head coverage and you have a higher precipitation rate, your run time is going to be shorter. If you have poor head-to-head coverage or a low precipitation rate, that run time is going to be longer. A better way to look at that is look at soil saturation. Generally, you want to saturate that soil profile about 9 to 12 inches. You want to get past the roots of the grass. Once you get down there, you've watered completely. You've saturated the whole soil profile up to fill capacity. You want to stop watering and let that dry out until you reach, maybe where the top 3 inches is almost completely dry. Then it's time for another watering. And that really can vary. A good example, I run micro rotors on my front lawn with domestic water. They run for 3 hours, which is an incredibly long time, but they put out a really small amount of water, though. What is that? What is a micro rotor? You've probably seen them. I call them the finger sprinklers. You see them rotate, and they have these little fingers of water that rotate out, and they look really cool, and the precipitation rate is extremely low on that, so there's zero runoff at all is able to actually penetrate the soil profile. But since it's such a low rate, you got to run that zone a lot longer to get the same amount of water that you would out of maybe a standard nozzle. Does that actually save water by doing it that way? It does. Again, you don't get any of the runoff, and runoff is a huge problem here in the valley with our clay soils. So anytime you get that low precipitation rate and allow that water to actually migrate through the soil, that's better. And the micro rotors aren't necessarily good for raw water. The gears in there and the openings are just too fine for that, not without some super good filtration. But on a domestic system, they are the cat's meow, so to speak. And a lot of the properties here in Mesa County, especially in the city areas and whatnot, are on the domestic water systems too. So That is the only option for some people.
Exactly. And that really, if you've got domestic water, going with a really low precipitation rate nozzle is definitely the way to go. There is, as with everything, there's always another side to that. You definitely cannot use those during the daytime. Their precipitation rate is so low, you can lose a vast majority of that due to just evaporation when you have the really low dew points, really high temperatures. That's definitely a nighttime only nozzle in order to see it at its best efficiency.
So you brought up a couple of things. You talked about the soils, because we do have a lot of clay soils. How does that affect the watering?
It affects the time that we can, or the amount of water we can put down at one time. If you don't have a really cool micro precipitation rotor, if you're using a standard nozzle, you got to do a cycle soak. So basically, you kick the system on and just say arbitrarily you run it for 5 minutes, and it's going to shut off and set for an hour, and then it's going to run for another 5 minutes, and then shut off and set for an hour. And that's giving that water a chance to percolate down through that soil profile instead of just sheeting off and running into the street.
Yeah, otherwise you're just watching it literally go down the drain.
You got it, exactly.
Okay. And then we talked about timing. Is there a time of day that's better than others?
10 p.m. to 6 a.m. is what CSU has found the best time to water lawns. It's a disease potential there, too. You don't really want to water them late in the evening, so like a 6, 7, 8 o'clock time frame. And it gets a little complicated why that is, but you can have some fungal growth that causes. So really, 10 p.m. is about the time you'd want to start watering, and you want to have that wrapped up by about 6 a.m.
You know, based on everything that you said, which is a ton of information, a lot of things to think about, it's probably going to vary a lot depending on what someone actually has in their yard.
And that's it, exactly. And each yard is different. Each one presents challenges, whether it's on a slope or it has a higher clay content or even a lower clay content. A lot of folks in the Redlands have a very sandy soil base. And so that's a whole different water strategy with that. Some folks have really old systems, literally from the 70s and 80s. There's a challenge that comes along with those. Other people have very modern systems that have actually been engineered. And to understand, back in the 70s, 80s, there wasn't much engineering involved in sprinklers. If someone said, oh, it looks good to go here, and they threw one in. Now there's a whole mathematical formula that gets used with that, making sure you get that head-to-head coverage and how much precipitation you're getting out. Dr. Swift, back in the day during CSU Master Gardener class, used to say if you could get like 60-65% efficiency out of a sprinkling system, you were doing really well. With today's technology, you can really push that to 80-85%. Again, if you're using good, clean domestic water with the correct nozzles, and get a really efficient irrigation system.
Yeah, like everything, technology changes over time, and your options change over time, and there might be this might be a good time for people to evaluate their systems and say, maybe I need to have someone come out and give me some information and take a look.
Absolutely. And no doubt it's going to cost more money than what it used to back in the old days, because we're trying to make that system more efficient. We're trying to get it to do more things, and that does require more upfront investment. But when you look at the water savings with that and the environment that we're living in, that really is, I think, a worthwhile investment to make in order to keep those cool season grasses. There's so much value to having turf grass, and everything's got to be in balance. But boy, we quite frankly, I don't think we want to look like Phoenix, where everything's just rock. I love the lawns, but we got to treat that water like it's precious, which it is.
Well, if people have more questions, how can they get a hold of you?
Feel free to reach out to our office. We got several technicians. And, of course, any irrigation provider can generally provide this information. Building that relationship with someone is what's real important. I would recommend folks not to drag the first guy they find off the street. Actually call one of the reputable suppliers here in the Valley. And we've got several companies that specialize in this just in the Grand Valley here. And I really recommend reach out to one of them, establish that relationship, not only with the company, but with the individual providing the service.
And it's time to get on it right now because those canals are filling up.
That's right.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. A lot of great information. This segment airs on the second Wednesday of each month. You can also listen to podcasts on demand at KAFM Community Radio.org. And we will see you next month.